Welcome to today's training session. This is the first of a dozen short training lessons all around the topic of application administration within Sage CRM. So there are 12 in this series. Today we're going to be looking at email configuration, and you can see that we are going to be covering all aspects of the configuration of Sage CRM. So that's everything from being able to today look at the email configuration through email templates, looking on at how translations are linked into the idea of those ability to handle emails within the products. We'll look at things like email aliases and signatures and dealing with document templates and controlling system behavior. So many of the day-to-day tasks that a system administrator has to be able to perform. And it's a useful revision, therefore, on the basic topics that you'll be working with. Specifically, in today's session, we're going to be looking at how we can configure the system, so we can govern how emails are sent from Sage CRM. And we're going to be looking at both the general setup of the internal email client, as well as the idea of configuring it to work with OAuth 2 required systems, so systems like Gmail and Exchange. You can see that right now, as I switched into Sage CRM, you can see that I'm currently looking at an opportunity for a 120 user expense system, and I happen to be logged on as a demo user called Susan May, and I can see that on this screen I've got the ability to click on a hyperlink that will call up the email of the client that I'm looking at, and that's you can see here that this is yaltoys at demosagecrm.com. That's the email address that's in the top of the menu, in top part of the screen, in the top content. There is in fact a couple of ways in which we can call email from the screen. We can, if I click on the communications tab here, you can see that there's a new email button down on the right hand side of the screen, and also if I was to go into the new menu, you can see that there's an option to send there an email. But if I just choose from within this screen, use the top content link, I can send a new email to the person, Simon Yaltoy, that's associated with this opportunity. So I can do that just by clicking on the hyperlink, and this will open up the internal email client. So that's popped onto my screen. This is, and you can see that I'm using the internal email client because, well, I have configured Sage CRM to use the internal email client. Now we'll look at screens in a moment that allow us to control the configuration, but you can see that I happen to have here, as I've come into this, I happen to have an email signature already configured. Now we're going to be looking at email signatures when we cover the creation of email templates. So I'm using something right now that I will look at the definition of in a little bit in the next lesson. So you can see what I've done here is I've actually switched to use a particular template, and this template is demonstrating the fact that the emails from within the system can include attachments, either in the form of a basic file attachment or an inline graphic. You can see that this particular email has got an email inline graphic within the signature. And so what's on the screen is what's going to be sent from within Sage CRM, and is what's going to be then stored inside Sage CRM. And it's important to realize that when we're looking at a screen like this, then the text that we've seen has been created by the template. But if I was to type in additional text in here and then I click send, then what happens is that the text of the email that is actually on the screen is what is sent and then what is stored inside inside the system against the user, against the contact, because the template doesn't force the particular email. It allows you to be customized and change it away from whatever the template says. So the email that's in my current configuration is going to be recorded as the communication stored inside Sage CRM, and that includes any additions that I make into the text here. And you can see that as I click send, the communication has been sent out. Well, actually, I have to go from here. This is the screen that it's returned to after I've just sent the email. And if I click over, I've gone on to the communications list. It doesn't show me here the information that I want, so I'm going to have to change the filter to change to show all records, and now you can see that our email is listed at the top of the communications, and it also, as you can see on the left hand side in the left hand column, that it indicates that it has attachments. And if I drill down into that email, clicking into the link, you can see that it's stored inside Sage CRM, and then we can access the recorded version of an email at any time. Now, other lessons are going to be looking at controlling the forwarding and reply to features of Sage CRM, and we'll also, in a different lesson, look at the feature of being able to file emails that have come into Outlook, and to be able to directly save those into Sage CRM. We've got some existing lessons up on the YouTube channel. That is where this lesson will eventually land as well. So the settings for the email features are all found inside the administration screens, and that's ultimately what we have to think about changing now to understand what's going on. So if I switch across, I've opened up another browser tab, and you can see here if I log on to CRM as an administrative user, you can see that in fact it is the system administrator that I've come into, so I'm going to go off now and look at the administration screens. So I go up to look at admin screens. I'm going to go then into email, documents, and then into the email configuration screen. And as you can see here, this is where we start to decide whether or not we want to use the email embedded editor, or rather CRM's version of an editing screen. We can just click now to start to edit and look at the information here. What if we were to decide not to use the embedded email editor? This is perhaps not so silly a question, because there are customers who choose not to use the embedded email editor, and it's typically because they're wanting to use a very specific email client. They want to be able to send emails from within another email client, and they want therefore additional processes to take place. And it might be that you want to process emails via the mail manager as well, to carry out another form of automation around the sending of emails. So the mail manager is a feature of Sage CRM which we'll be discussing in another lesson. There are existing blog articles, etc., that discuss the mail manager. But here you can see that what I've done is I filled in an address that the mail manager can use. So I've put a filelit email address up there. And you can see that this is the idea that what would happen now is if inside Sage CRM, if I was to click on the link, here I'm looking at another system of Sage CRM. This screenshot is showing where I've clicked on the email address. And in this case, I'm not using the internal email client. I've opened up the email client that's on my machine. This is because the email links have all turned into pseudo URLs, so they've all using the mail to HTML pseudo URL. So it's popping up the email client, and very clearly you can see here that I don't get an option to use any of the internal CRM templates. And also, if I'd want to have a record of the communications that is held inside Sage CRM, then I would have to use the mechanism of using the mail manager to carry out the filing. And so that's why I've got this filelit email address included as a blind carbon copy. So I would get a copy of that. As I said, the mail manager is going to be discussed in another lesson. So here I've come back looking at the email screens, and I'm looking at the idea of send mail using, and we've got a choice of how we go about if we are going to use the internal mail client, of how we configure it to take place. So here I have a mechanism for being able to determine how I send emails. Now notice that I'm not at this point thinking about using the OAuth 2 mechanism. I'm going to discuss that towards the end of this lesson, but here I'm just thinking about what if I'm using just a standard SMTP client. I'm just going to use basic authentication. How am I going to do this? And we've got a broad choice. Either we're going to use the option of internal SMTP, or we use the option of CDO sys. It's marked as CDON CDO sys, but it's CDO sys. So if we choose internal SMTP, then Sage CRM acts as the SMTP client to the outgoing mail server, and that's where you would specify the outgoing mail server IP address and SMTP port. A limitation of that option is that the email, because of the way in which we commit and then send, the limitation is that the email is always recorded as sent inside Sage CRM, even in cases where the email has not been dispatched by the mail client. Now, to overcome this, that's where you could find yourself CCing yourself to make sure that when you're externally emailing companies and contacts, so they always can cross-reference communications with emails as a type of proof that you've received that email. The other choice that you have is CDO sys. Now, once upon a time, the internal objects for sending emails was called CDONS, and sometimes you find people still referring to it as CDONS, though it is this collaboration data objects, which are the CDO sys library, which is part of IIS. The functionality is the same from the user's perspective, and this is all to do where you would specify the outgoing mail server IP address and SMTP port and set up the correct CDO sys options within IIS. And you can access copies then of sent emails. They would be listed on underneath the INET mail route location to be able to check problems with email delivery. So there's a bad mail option within the INET pub mail route. This is all documented, and I would advise you, if you're setting this up, go and have a look at the documentation for the setup of sending, either using the internal client or by using CDA-sys. Now you can see that there are other areas that are controlled on this screen, which includes not only the identification of the mail server that's going to be used and the port that's going to be used, but we can also see whether we support the idea of authenticated SMTP and TLS. Now we're going to be setting this up so that when a user like Susan May sends an email, it's coming from Susan May's account inside the server. And so we need to make sure, by necessity, the email server that you're using, that the sender has permission on the account on the server, as well as being able to route the email out. So this is the setting up the correct permissions if you're using this idea of routing out. Now we'll be covering, you'll see also that there are options here for SMS messages. I'm going to cover SMS in a separate lesson, so I'll come back to this screen and cover specifically SMS in another lesson. So I'm just looking at the basic email configuration screens, and you can also see this idea of TLS. I don't think that you would ever now not tick TLS in the setup of emails. TLS, if you're not aware of the terminology, well, this is the successor technology to secure sockets, and it provides this idea of privacy and data integrity between two systems. So it's all about ensuring that the messages are not vulnerable in transit. Now we're going to have a look now at the idea of, well, we've used basic authentication for this, but what actually if we were using something like Exchange Online, or we're using Google Workspace as our email servers? They all require OAuth 2 as the mechanism for authentication. They don't like basic authentication. If you're so Sage CRM has the ability to configure Sage CRM to use OAuth 2. Customers who are using Exchange or another email server on their own machine, so you're within your own network, then you can continue to use basic authentication. But it is increasingly the case that people are using people are using the idea of OAuth 2. So there are some basic steps that must be followed where Sage CRM is being configured to use Gmail or Exchange. Sage CRM has to be registered as either an application for, well, it has to be registered as an application either for Google or for Exchange. So actually as an Entra or Active Directory application. The Sage CRM application will then request that the user grants access to data in their Google or Exchange account, and then after consent is given, the Sage CRM application will request and receive credentials to access the appropriate system, Google, Gmail or Exchange, and those credentials can then be updated or refreshed as necessary. Once you've created and registered an application, you'll need to store back inside Sage CRM the public client ID and the private client secret. So the client ID is the public identifier for the application, and the client secret is the secret known only to the application and to the authorization server. Let's look at that step by step and see what we do. So this is the overall idea of what we're going to be doing. We're going to be using OAuth 2 to connect to Google Workspace. So I'm going to look at the integration with Gmail, therefore. And a registered application must be created to allow you to obtain the public client ID and the private client secret. What you can see is that I've come into the security area to do that. So we have to make sure that that our application is that for our Google account, the less secure access is disabled. So that's the account that owns the Gmail mailbox, which you'll be configuring for the OAuth 2 access. And so I'm signed in to the Google Cloud platform. And from here, I can go into the APIs and services, and I'm going to create a new project. So when I go from the new project into the OAuth consent screen, I've selected external and then click create. And if I click create, I start to the creation of a new app. And now inside where we are on this screen is the OAuth consent screen. Here I've filled in the required fields, and so that just allows me to save and continue. The next thing that has to be considered is the scope, and here you can see that I've added in the OpenID scope, and that allows me to then to save and continue. Once I've done that, I can complete the remaining steps, and this means that I set up a test user. So I've set up a test user, and then click save. And this leads me onto the summary page, and on the summary page, I then need to click to go onto the credentials area. So once I'm on the credentials area, I can click the menu option to go into the create credentials and then select the OAuth client ID. Within the application type, I can select the web application and then provide an informative name for the application. And that's going to be the thing that has to be echoed back to me when we come to configure the email screen. You'll notice that there's this authorized redirect URI, and I've added in there the URL all in lowercase, and you can see that it is this localhost, the install name, custom pages, and OAuth callback.html, and that's the callback that I'm using. So the install name is the name of the Sage CRM installation. All this is detailed within the Help Center and the System Administration Guide for Sage CRM. So if we're using HTTP as well, this is something that's important, and because I in my test environment I was managing to use HTTP, but in fact you only have to use HTTPS now, and if you're using HTTPS within the URL, then you must use HTTPS, and then once that's entered in, you can click create. This gives you the screen that pops up the client ID and secret. So these have to be copied, displayed and stored into a file. And I, for the purposes of creating these slides, I've dropped them into a text editor. And then once we've got the client ID and secret, we can then use these to configure the internal email client. So I can come back. So if I just show you that screen again, you see I've entered in the client and the secret, and then it comes to pressing save. I'm going to be prompted to grant permission for my application to access the Gmail account. And once I've allowed that, I'm going to be returned back to the configuration screen. So I'm being prompted to authorize through here. The next thing that I have to do is to specify the outgoing mail server, the SMTP port for the Gmail application, and then also mark that it's dealing with TLS as well. And you can see that, or you will see in a moment, that I've also named the account to be used as well, and that would complete the setup. So once we have the client ID and secret, we can use these to do that, and you can see that I'm back on the configuration screen. Okay. To summarize what we've looked at then, this email configuration, we've gone through the internal email client settings that allow users to send and receive emails directly from within the CRM interface. But it isn't just the internal email client that these settings are used for. They're also used for the bulk send for groups within campaign management. So when you're dealing with groups or you're dealing with campaigns, that idea of sending out an email blast, that uses the same settings configured in the screen that I've just looked at. Escalation rules as well can send out emails, and those escalation and notification rules all rely on the settings in the screen that I've just looked at as well. This brings me to the end of what we're going to talk about. So we've looked at email configuration in this lesson. We'll be looking at email templates tomorrow. We'll be going on and still following on around emails when we look at SMS configuration next week, and the control of forward and reply translations and the setting up of aliases, and then considering how the mail merge features within Sage CRM work. The rest of the lessons will all follow neatly. Let's see though if anyone's got any questions. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.